Anthropic reported on Monday that its annualized revenue has surpassed $30 billion. That means it appears to have eclipsed OpenAI, which disclosed last week as part of its mammoth fundraising round that it was generating around $2 billion per month, or at least $24 billion annualized. What's going on, everybody? Radio here, and we are back with another video. Today, we are gonna read through this article that is comparing the annualized revenue of Anthropic and OpenAI and how they may have closed the gap on OpenAI. And also, I have a Forbes article and a Wall Street Journal article that is kind of gonna go into a little more depth about how Anthropic and OpenAI are calculating their revenues and what are the big differences between the two companies. Alrighty. It would be a remarkable feat of catch up by Anthropic, the company behind ChatGPT competitor Claude, and more importantly, the suite of AI tools for businesses such as coding agent Claude Code. At the start of 2025, OpenAI led Anthropic in an annualized revenue by $6 billion versus $1 billion, according to self-reported figures from both companies. By early 2026, that gap has widened to $20 billion for OpenAI versus Anthropic's $9 billion. But the popularity of Anthropic's coding agents has soared this year, and the company has built on the momentum with a series of software plugins for Claude that wiped around $1 trillion from software and service stocks globally in February. Damn, that's a huge number. And despite the Pentagon's blacklisting of Anthropic over AI use restrictions, the company's enterprise success has allowed its business to keep chugging along. And I think that's what we were talking about in yesterday's video when we were reading that Atlantic article, and that they were kind of discussing some of the downfalls and shortfalls of OpenAI. And in the video, we were talking about how Claude is really gaining momentum in the enterprise space, and now we're actually seeing some numbers, and it's very interesting that within a very short period of time, not only they closed the gap, but it appears that they may have surpassed it. So yeah, good on them. OpenAI supporters may dispute the figures. Khosla venture partner Ethan Choi, whose firm was an early investor in OpenAI, argued in March that comparing each company's self-reported figures is apples to oranges. Both companies host their models on third-party platforms such as Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure, and pay a cut to those hyperscalers as part of their arrangement. But Anthropic counts revenue on a gross basis, meaning it does not subtract the cut it pays to the third-party platforms in the same way that OpenAI does, Choi said. In other words, if OpenAI followed its rivals' accounting principles, its numbers would be higher, which is, I don't know, you guys tell me, are Anthropic being a little bit deceiving of the investors when they do it like this? Or, yeah, what would be the reasoning for that? Why would Anthropic disclose the gross while OpenAI is disclosing the net? But regardless of the precise numbers, Anthropic's extraordinary growth rate points to a lesson that OpenAI is now trying to apply. In terms of generating cash, the key metric is not the number of users where ChatGPT dwarfs Claude, but the volume of tokens, which is very true. We're talking about how just using Claude is way more efficient for businesses because it is such a good model for that enterprise business development level versus ChatGPT, where it does kind of skew towards the regular day-to-day user. Even though they're trying to change that right now. I don't think we're going to read about that. Tokens, the name for a unit of data, corresponds to the size of a workload that a user tasks a chatbot to perform. In terms of revenue, it's starting to show that it's better to have a small number of developers whose coding tasks are token intensive than a large number of users asking a chatbot casual questions, one OpenAI investor told me, because the developers will continuously use those tokens and will try to iterate on the generated output over and over and over again versus just a regular chatbot user, which will just take the answer and kind of they wouldn't try to dig deeper as much as a developer would, and they wouldn't try to regenerate and use more tokens as much as a developer would. It's no wonder OpenAI has redrawn its product roadmap to focus on the enterprise, as my colleague Deepa Sithraman, sorry, butchered that name, as my colleague Deepa wrote about in the last week's newsletter. The company will be hoping that in shutting down services like video generation app Sora, which we talked about, and redirecting resources towards coding tools like Codex, which we also talked about, it can tap into the same stream of revenue from heavy token usage. As both companies race toward prospective IPOs before the end of the year, their head-to-head battle for enterprise clients will likely have the greatest bearing on what financials they can present during their respective road shows, which is very interesting. I would definitely want to see how this will be sustained. There has been some rumors and reports, and let me see if I can actually pull it up. Everything seems to be going well for Anthropic, but there has been this. We have been seeing this. AMD's AI director is not happy with Anthropic's Claude Code. Issue raised on GitHub reads, Claude cannot be trusted to perform complex engineering tasks. Every senior engineer in my team has reported similar experiences and anecdotes. Okay. Claude Code's performance isn't impressing Stella Lorenzo anymore. AMD's AI chief took to her Stellar Access GitHub to write, has regressed to the point it cannot be trusted to perform complex engineering. Her comments are based on internal analysis of more than 6,800 coding sessions, nearly 235,000 tool calls, and close to 18,000 reasoning blocks. She said multiple engineers on her team have reported similar issues, pointing to a rise in stop hook violations, where the model exits tasks early or requests unnecessary permissions. She also noted behavioral shift in Claude Code from a research first to an edit first approach, which she said led to lower quality code, weaker adherence to conventions, and reduced reliability during longer sessions, which is something that's been happening very recently. And it seems that Anthropic's compute is being hit very heavily because of the demand, because of the enterprise demands. And they're really they're spreading themselves thin, trying to give access to everybody, give access as much as possible to everybody. So that'll be interesting. Anthropic responded to the claims with the company's engineer Boris Cherny stating that the redact thinking setting only hides reasoning from the interface and does not reduce models' actual reasoning. The company also pointed to the introduction of the adaptive thinking in Claude Opus 4.6, where the system determines how long to think depending on the tasks. Some people want the model to think for longer, even if it takes more time and tokens. To improve intelligence, more set effort equal high via /effort in your settings .json. So basically, he's kind of telling them like, hey, like if you really want the model to think more and the thinking block speed longer, just kind of give it a little nudge. Give it a little nudge in that direction. Anthropic added, while the default medium effort setting 85 balances performance and efficiency, it is testing higher effort configurations for teams and enterprise users so that they can benefit from extended thinking, even if it comes at the cost of additional tokens and latency. At least they weren't really being dismissive, right? But that is something that's been happening where Claude is being, some people say it's being lobotomized, but I don't believe it. I think it's just the demand is so high that they definitely don't have enough compute for everybody, and they're trying to use every trick in the book, try to have as much efficiency as possible. So that is something to actually watch out for. As much as Anthropic may have been closing the lead, it might not be for long. And if they can't really address the compute needs of their users and their customers, it might be an issue later down the line. They might close the gap. They might pass OpenAI, but at some point they'll need Claude to perform consistently over time. So that's something to watch out for. So I want to go through this. This is an article on Forbes. OpenAI and Anthropic count revenue differently, and investors are looking into it. When OpenAI and Anthropic report their headline revenue numbers, they are not measuring the same thing. the two largest independent AI labs in the United States, recognize revenue from their cloud distribution partnerships in structurally different ways, a discrepancy that has remained largely unexamined during a period of explosive growth, but is likely to surface when either company files for a public offering, which we were talking about just earlier. The core difference. The distinction centers on how each company handles revenue that flows through hyperscaler partnerships. According to a widely circulated analysis by investor Ethan Choi, a partner at Khosla Ventures, OpenAI reports revenue from its Microsoft Azure partnership on a net basis, deducting the roughly 20% revenue share paid to Microsoft before reporting the total. Anthropic, by contrast, reports revenue from its Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud partnerships on a gross basis, including the hyperscaler's revenue share in its top line figure before expenses are recognized. The financial implication is material. If Anthropic adopted the same net reporting convention as OpenAI, its reported revenue would be meaningfully lower. Ooh, interesting. Choi wrote that on a comparable basis, Anthropic would be materially lower in revenue relative to current disclosures. The revenue share sums involved are not trivial. Bank of America analysts estimated in March 2026 that Anthropic could pay hyperscale cloud providers up to $6.4 billion in 2026 through revenue sharing agreements that tied to reselling its Claude models, up from $1.9 billion in 2025. Whoa, that is a lot. That's almost 3 times of an increase more. That's more than 3 times the increase. Holy shit. At that scale, the gross versus net question directly shapes how investors interpret growth trajectories and unit economics. And then they're going around how each partnership is structured and stuff like that. But I mainly wanted to look at the core difference here. It all comes down to them when the IPO opens, and we'll see how everything shakes up, because they have to disclose revenue and they have to kind of show their numbers from then on. So yeah, I would definitely be interested to see what they are going through. And just to kind of cap off the video, we are gonna look at OpenAI and Anthropic's finances ahead of their IPOs, just kind of get a gauge of how things are looking when it comes to both of their companies' initial public offerings. This is from Wall Street Journal. OpenAI and Anthropic are racing toward potentially record-breaking initial public offerings by the end of the year. An inside look at the financials of both companies prior to funding rounds completed earlier this year shows their Achilles heel: the soaring costs needed to train new artificial intelligence models. OpenAI expects to spend $121 billion on computing power for AI research in 2028. That means the company anticipates burning $85 billion that year, even after almost doubling sales from the prior year. Such losses would dwarf those of virtually any other public company in history. Anthropic doesn't expect to spend nearly as much, but its rosiest forecasts tell a similar story of mounting computing costs, which I think that is the name of the game for all these companies. It's nice that everybody's building data centers and everybody's scaling up in that way, but trying to make that more efficient and trying to bring the costs of all those down would actually be very, very beneficial. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're gonna use any less compute, and that doesn't necessarily mean we're gonna have less data centers. But I think that's just if they're working on making the models more efficient and having them run faster, be more powerful on less compute, that would benefit them in the long run, because the data centers that they are gonna have and all these massive scale projects are just gonna power the models even further than they would have initially. So yeah, I would definitely be interested to see what happens in the future. Both companies are releasing new versions of their AI models at a faster cadence than ever before, while pouring more resources into the training runs that create them. The arms race is showing no signs of slowing. Below are charts drawn from confidential financial documents that both companies shared with investors ahead of their latest funding rounds. They offer a window into the economics of the two largest AI labs in the world. The information earlier reported some of the figures. One defining factor of each startup's balance sheets is the runaway spending tied to training new AI models. The reason: each jump in intelligence is harder to come by and costs more than the last one. OpenAI expects to spend much more money than Anthropic training new models in the coming years. And as we can see, these are the training costs in billions of dollars. OpenAI is projecting that in 2026, they're going to spend more than $25 billion. 2027, more than $50 billion. By 2028, that's close to $125 billion. 2029, 125, and then they're hoping maybe AGI somewhere around here. They're hoping the $125 billion get up to AGI. Well, comparing to Anthropic is hoping at the most they'll spend around less than $50 billion. This looks like $40 billion at the most. The costs are set to be so mind-bogglingly high that both companies report two different measures of profitability. One that includes training costs and one that leaves them out. Strip out compute for research, and OpenAI is actually on track to turn a small pre-tax operating profit this year, as is Anthropic under its best case scenario. Add that back in, and OpenAI doesn't expect to break even until the 2030s. And Anthropic forecasts reaching that milestone sooner. An OpenAI spokesperson said the company is giving a priority to growth over profits and could dial back spending on training, but expects a strong return on investment. And that's been kind of their motto. OpenAI has been spending because they are confident that in the future they're gonna get it back, and in the future they're gonna have all those returns on investments. While Anthropic is a little bit tighter on the purse, but because of the strength of their models, they are generating more and more revenue right now. However, this all could change in the future. We don't know. It definitely depends on how well they can sustain the needs of their customers and how well they can sustain the compute needs of everyone, so that they can keep the models going and running and improve them over time without their data centers being strained. Venture capital firms have stomached vast losses, in part because OpenAI and Anthropic are among the fastest growing businesses in history of tech, which we saw earlier in the Reuters document. Which, holy crap, like in 1 year they went from like a couple billion to like 10, 20, 30 billion dollars in revenue, which is insanity. Each expects to more than double revenue this year, thanks largely to business customers' adoption of new AI tools. OpenAI was caught flat-footed after Anthropic released a new version of his coding tool, Claude Code, last fall, but has since poured more resources into its Codex code assistant and prioritized sales to business customers. And this is their yearly revenue by segment in billions. And this is the OpenAI projections, and they have a very, very strong consumer leg of their business, and they're not really counting on this, but this is like kind of it's nice to have. This is a very nice to have, and they're really trying to grow that enterprise segment. And we're right here right now, 2026. This is their projection, and they're hoping that this kind of gets more, but it's the opposite story for Anthropic, where most of their business is enterprise, and they're not even really projecting to have that much consumer business, but they really trying to double down on enterprise because that's where most of their business is coming from right now. Revenue comparison between the two isn't technically apples to apples. Anthropic counts sales of its technology through cloud partners as revenue, while OpenAI doesn't. We talked about that. So it's still a little bit of a difference on how they present their revenue. OpenAI and Anthropic also spend billions of dollars a year to process queries made on their AI systems. These so-called inference costs currently eat into more than half of revenue for each company, though that percentage is expected to go down over time, a sign that the technology is becoming cheaper to run. Only a tiny sliver of ChatGPT's users pay for the service, meaning that OpenAI doesn't generate revenue for a large chunk of its inference costs. Not yet, but they are adding ads. So that definitely should kind of offset the cost of gaining the free users. Is, you have the ads, and that kind of somewhat can pay for you having more and more free users. Most of Anthropic's revenue comes from enterprises. We talked about that. An OpenAI spokesperson said the company chooses to support free users because it helps with the broader adoption of its technology. He added that OpenAI can also make money from those users by showing them ads and converting them into subscribers, among other things. They're disclosing Wall Street Journal as a partnership, okay? And both OpenAI and Anthropic will burn through a giant amount of cash in the coming years and are counting on their IPO investors to help bio their business and keep it afloat. To accommodate massive amounts of cash these companies will need to raise, bankers are trying to change the rules around IPO fundraising by asking major index providers to loosen their rules for entry. The Nasdaq recently said that it would allow newly listed companies to join its index faster, giving them access to broader pools of capital, which is interesting. I think it's got to be like a special case, right? Are they gonna do it for every company? I don't think so. Yeah, who knows what's gonna happen? And I hope the IPO launch is pretty soon, and so we don't have to wait too long to see what's gonna happen in the future. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. If you guys could invest in OpenAI or Anthropic, which one would you do? Which one would you put more money into? I think personally, I'm more inclined to invest in Anthropic. Just hypothetically, if I had the money, I would be more inclined to put it in Anthropic. But the news of the compute and the news of their models not really doing too well recently. This is very recent. This is from a couple days ago. This is actually a little bit concerning, and I would be very interested to see if OpenAI has the same issues as Anthropic is having right now. Now, Anthropic has had compute issues before when they were trying to kind of upgrade Claude and kind of add all those new tools to it. That was more like a usage issue, and there was a lot of users that were complaining that the usage is running out faster. They fixed that. They gave users more usage, but now what we're getting is the other side of it, where the usage that you're having is not comparable to the quality of the usage is not comparable to what you had before. So I'm genuinely interested to see how they're gonna fix this issue, and how are they gonna respond to are they gonna just tell companies to spend more money having the models think harder, or are they gonna actually try to engineer the models to be more efficient and kind of get them back to the quality that they were? But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Which company are you guys interested in, and which company are you guys which company do you guys use? Which you guys using ChatGPT? Do you guys use Claude? Yeah, let me know. Leave comments below. Make sure you guys subscribe, like, and I will see you guys next time.